Everyone, it's great to have you all join us today. We've still got people coming in, but I'll just get started because we've got a few introductory slides before we launch into the event tonight. So I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So the ASEG acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today and that many lands on which we undertake our work. We recognise their continuing connection to these lands, water and culture, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. So tonight or this morning, depending on where you are in the world, our webinar is presented to you by Associate Professor Heather Handley and Professor Iain Stewart on the topic of selling planet Earth, communicating geoscience for society. But I will just go through a few housekeeping and introductory, just stop sharing, and a few introductory slides before I hand over to them. So I'd like to acknowledge our corporate members, so our corporate plus members, Total Seismic, High Size and Bell Size, and our corporate members, Southern Geoscience Consultants, Santos, Doug Technology, Instrumentation, GDD Inc. and Transparent Earth Geophysics. Huge thank you to them for the support of our society and the ASEG Research Foundation, which supports geophysics students in honours, masters and PhD work. I'd also like to thank our branch sponsors for the WA branch and the South Australian Northern Territory branch, which help make the local events possible for these branches. We've got a few upcoming ASCG events. So our next one is next Thursday on the 7th of April by Dr. Taku Aidi. He's speaking on the role of the oil and gas industry towards a net zero future. And we'll also have our federal AGM there. So if you're in Brisbane, you can join in person. Otherwise, you can join online for that. On the 29th of April, we've got Professor Steve Begg, who's talking on would you know a good decision if you saw one? And on the 10th of May, Tom Raymond from Doug Technology, one of our corporate sponsors, multi-parameter FWI imaging, high resolution imaging directly from raw field data. So if you go to our ASCG website and the events page, then you'll find out how to register for all of these. And they're free for anyone to attend. I'd also like to highlight that abstract submission is open for the next Australasian Exploration Geoscience Convention. So that's going to be held in Brisbane on the 13th of March 2023. So our last conference ended up being a virtual conference due to COVID. So we're very much looking forward to all getting together in person. So hopefully can see you there. So these webinars, as I mentioned, are free to everyone. And I know we have a lot of non-members joining today for this very popular topic. Just to highlight a couple of these benefits, if you join up, you do get access to our technical journal, Exploration Geophysics, our magazine preview. A lot of our events are free, our monthly branch events where we have guest speakers, and you do get reduced entry to the AEGC conference that I mentioned before. And we also, for students, membership is free, so that's a great opportunity for them. And recent graduates and retirees can get half price membership. I'll put the links to our social media accounts in the chat shortly as well, if you'd like to stay in touch. So with the webinar today, there'll be a great opportunity for Q&A at the end. So you can ask questions during the talk using the Q&A or chat function, and I'll ask these to Heather and Iain at the end. Otherwise, at the end, you can use the raise hand function if you'd rather ask the question aloud. So over to our talk today. So when I invited Professor Iain Stewart and Associate Professor Heather Handley to give this webinar after the ASEG recently began sponsoring the inaugural Earth Futures Festival. So for those of you who don't know, that festival is an international film festival that showcases the role of geoscience in a sustainable future. It was a very easy choice for us at the ASEG to choose to sponsor this festival. You'll hear a lot more about it in the webinar, but for the ASEG, it aligns with 3 out of 4 of our main aims for our society: to promote the science of geophysics, to foster fellowship and cooperation between geophysicists, and to encourage closer understanding and cooperation with other Earth scientists. And of course, this festival isn't just focused on geophysics, but we're hoping that by supporting this festival that we can help to encourage geophysicists around the world, and hopefully some ASEG members, to get on board and enter this competition. We're very proud to support an initiative with such a worthwhile goal, and I'm sure you're all aware that geoscience is critically important in a sustainable future. And the ASEG are very keen to support geophysicists through the transition to a net zero future and support initiatives that help promote the importance of geoscience to the public and on communicating geoscience. The festival helped to address all of these goals, and I'm delighted that Iain and Heather have both accepted this invitation. Both very experienced science communicators, and I'm sure you'll all learn a lot from them in the next 40 minutes or so. Before I hand you over to Iain, who will be speaking first tonight, I would just like to tell you a little bit more about them both. So Professor Iain Stewart is the El Hassan Research Chair in Sustainability at the Royal Scientific Society in Jordan. He's the co-director of the Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability at Ashoka University in India and Professor of Geoscience Communication at the University of Plymouth and the founding director of the university's Sustainable Earth Institute. His long-standing research interests are in natural hazards, sustainable geoscience and earth science communication. His geocommunication work is built on a 15-year partnership with BBC Television presenting geoscience programs, Earth, the Power of the Planet, Earth, the Climate Wars, How Earth Made Us, How to Grow a Planet, The Rise of the Continents, and Planet Oil. And it recently was an academic advisor on Sir David Attenborough's acclaimed BBC series, Severn Worlds, One Planet. He's been awarded an MBE for his services to geography and geology education. He's president of the Royal Scottish Geographical Society and was communications lead and evidence chair for the Scottish Government's Climate Citizens Assembly. A global champion of earth science, Iain leads the UNESCO International Geoscience Programme, Project 685 on geology and sustainable development, and holds a UNESCO chair in geoscience and society. An associate professor, Heather Handley, is a volcanologist and geochemist, and she's worked on some of the most active volcanoes on the planet. She uses the chemistry of volcanic rocks and their minerals to better understand how volcanoes work and what triggers volcanic eruptions in order to reduce volcanic risk. Heather holds a Bachelor of Science with Honours in Geology from the University of Edinburgh and a PhD in Volcano Geochemistry from Durham University in the UK. She was awarded an Australian Research Council Future Fellowship in 2012 to advance our understanding of the timescales of Earth system processes. Heather is an Associate Professor in Volcanic Hazards and Geoscience Community at the University of Twente and Adjunct Associate Professor at Monash University. She's a member of UNESCO IGCP 685 project team and governing councillor of the Geological Society of Australia. Heather is driven to communicate the critical role of geoscience in our sustainable future. As co-founder and director of the Earth Futures Festival and part of an international team, currently creating an atlas to highlight the many contributions of geoscientists to global sustainability challenges. She's a Science and Technology Australia 2021-2022 Superstar of STEM and passionate science communicator. She has led and participated in over 70 geoscience outreach events and workshops, frequently writes for The Conversation and has given more than 90 television, radio and print interviews on volcanoes. Heather's featured in documentaries for National Geographic and Discovery Science and is currently writing a popular science book on Australia's volcanoes. Heather strongly advocates for women in STEM, diversity and inclusion, and is co-founder and inaugural president of the Women in Earth and Environmental Science Australasia, WMESA network. Heather received an AIPS New South Wales Young Tall Poppy Award in 2014 and the Geological Society of Australia's Beryl Nasher Medal in 2021. And Heather is also mum to two very curious young girls. So I'm sure you'll agree from those outstanding bios that Heather and Iain are both very qualified to talk to us today about the importance of geoscience communication on the topic Selling Planet Earth, Communicating Geoscience for Society. So I'm very much looking forward to this talk, and Iain, I'm very delighted to hand over to you, and I'll stop sharing now and invite you to share your screen.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks. It's always slightly nervous hearing those bios, actually. Especially one time when someone introduced one of my programs as the rise of incontinence. So but yeah. So let me let's just share screen and kick off. There we go. And so you should be seeing the full screen. Oh, gosh, supposedly I can communicate. Let's go to the first one.
Spoiler alert.
Here we go. Okay, so yes, so the idea today is really to talk about about science communication, how we do it, but with a kind of geo tinge to it, really. Kate mentioned my new position as El Hassan Research Chair in Sustainability. El Hassan is Prince El Hassan, who in Jordan. And what's interesting, he's a kind of elder statesman, what's interesting is in a number of speeches, he's talked about the importance of the 3 Gs. The 3 Gs being geography, geology, and geophysics. And so it's very rare that you hear about an international statesman talking about the importance of geophysics, and that kind of hints at kind of why I'm here. So what I really want to do is to set the broad scene about, I think certainly the way that I see science communication. And then I think what we're going to do is we're going to delve into the detail about the actual practicalities of science communication or geoscience communication, and then finish off with the really nice example of the Earth Futures Festival from Heather. So if we think of just setting that landscape, the academic world, it's generally the academic world around science communication, I kind of imagine it in this rather simple plot. The vertical axis is what is the driving motivation of the scientist, the researcher. Is it knowledge-driven inquiry, if you like? Is it curiosity-driven, blue skies, frontier science? You know, why does this work? What happens here? And then at the kind of top of that vertical axis is much more problem-driven. You know, society gives us a problem, we use our expertise to solve it, and that's it. And most people sit somewhere in between and maybe even drift between the two over a career. And then along the horizontal is the extent to which the end user, the public or the policymaker or whatever it is actually participates in the scientific endeavor. So low to the left and high to the right. And really, I think most science communication is embedded in that bottom left-hand corner, really. So it emerges out of academic research and work. So research has been done that leads to technical papers in journal articles or conferences, and then people want to then sell that out to the wider public. And so I refer to that as a kind of make and sell approach. And really, most of my career has been on make and sell, and so it's a really critical one, and we're going to hear more about that. But the public understanding of science, just telling people about science, is only one part of it. And really, around about late 90s, 2000s, there was much more of an attempt for public engagement. So just bringing the public in, you know, rather than educating them about science, making sure they enjoy science, that science is fun, that they kind of start to understand that science is a way of looking at the world. And increasingly, that idea of engagement rests on trying to more understand your audience, the importance of the audience, rather than necessarily the scientific message. So I'm going to refer to that in this talk as sense and response, sensing the audience and responding with messages to that. And then I'm kind of arguing really that there's a new type of communication, and many people wouldn't even have this under communication, but a new type of communication that's emerging around genuine participation of the public in the scientific process and actionable science on the ground. And that I'm going to refer to as guide and co-create. The guide being the guidance is coming from experts, but we're co-creating the journey, if you like, into the future with the end user communities, whether that's the public or politicians. So those are the three that are kind of framings that I'm going to use. Make and sell for that thing about how we actually, get our science out the door to the broader public, transmitting it outwards, and then that more interactive mode of sense and respond, and then finally a kind of partnership mode of guide and co-create. So I said my career really has been based in make and sell. So that really has been a career about trying to take the planet and sell it in different ways. So really from 2002, 2003, all the way through to 2015, 2016, been making multi-part documentary series about Earth. You heard it earlier, it's either Earth or Planet somehow in the title, about how the Earth works, its history, and increasingly what it means for us. And going around more to the present day, you'll see a kind of change really with the last few around about energy. So I did a program on fracking, oil, things like that. So becoming a little bit more applied in a sense of trying to address some of the issues of the day. So I thought what I would do is give you a hint of those programs. You may be familiar, you may not, and then just talk a little bit about some of the key elements that I think are in there. And this is stuff that Heather will reprise really in just a second. So this video is just a few minutes, but it kind of it brings together, I think, a few of the really critical elements.
Leaving his team behind for fear of putting them in danger, the explorer continued his journey on foot, only to find his way blocked by the most impenetrable of all obstacles. While the water around me cascades down more than 100 metres to the river below, this pool forms a hidden sanctuary.
So if I just stop it there and just talk to some of the kind of key elements in that. That was the first few minutes of a 1-hour documentary about Africa as part of Rise of the Continents. And really, it was the setup for a sequence that was really going to look at the kind of plateau volcanism, the series of lava flows that happened as Pangaea, as the African continent started to break up. So prior to this rather technical outline of lavas and the kind of science of lavas, really, this was a sequence that introduced that. So the reason what happened there? Wow.
Just lost you for a minute there, Ian. Only for the last sort of, yeah.
Let me just reshare then. Thanks. Sorry about that, folks. I don't know what's happening. It looks fine at this end. Right. We got it. Okay. So if I just, well, I'll pull that up in just a second. So just to talk to some of those key elements then. Actually, let me put it back to this one. It's easier to do it, to talk to that. So some of the key elements that across this whole kind of body of work, really, awe and wonder. How do you pull out what's absolutely amazing, spectacular about the planet? Trying to make people's jaws drop to think, what, really? Is that the case? Wow. A really strong narrative and storytelling thread that goes through it, rather than concentrating on facts. There's plenty of facts that's going to come later on, but just trying to set a story up that seems quite familiar, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Relevance, making it relevant to people. It's one of the most famous locations on the planet. Many people have been there, and if they've not, they've certainly heard of the Victoria Falls. The use of people as part of stories. David Livingstone was the kind of narrative with the person there at the start, but then the other person was me, the presenter. And in science, we don't often see, or the scientific method, we don't often see the scientists. They're kind of just in the background. But actually, for communication, it's really important that the scientist is up front, because they're the gateway, the portal into the science. People have to like and find engaging the communicator in order to follow things. And then finally, being entertaining. You know, you're asking people to give up an hour or half an hour or 15 minutes of their life to hear you talk about something. And therefore, you have to make it interesting for them. So when they walk away, they've been entertained. So just some of the key elements really of this make and sell. What is it about? Well, the make and sell about it says that by being a better communicator, we can connect the science to people more. It kind of relies a little bit on the assumption that people have a lack of information, a lack of knowledge of science, and that's why they don't understand science or they don't agree with science. And so there's a real strong thing about us educating people about that, raising awareness of specific issues. I just want to jump to the bottom left and the bottom right. The bottom left talks about the skills. So that's all about, and we'll hear more about this from Heather, about translating the science jargon into plain English, this idea of storytelling, media literacy, understand how the media system works, really. And that extends to media training that your organization might do with you. And even to the extent nowadays that we create our own creative content. So phones and things like that, we can upload stuff, we can make our own movies, etc. And so the interactions that we see on the bottom right are between geoscience and the press teams, for example, media centres, with journalists directly, and that's increasingly the case with Twitter. And finally with people, boundary organisations like, for example, the society, that we on, trying to get connected with the other messages for getting across to particularly policymakers, etc. So that's make and sell. It's understanding how to communicate in a much more engaging and entertaining and accessible way. So the second thing, the second aspect is this business about sense and respond, and it recognises that there are different audiences out there. Now, in television and when I was working with the BBC, they were really explicitly aware of different audiences on different channels, even at different times on different channels. Who was it that was watching? How would they write for those people? What was the messages we were trying to get across? This particular graph is different. This is it's called the 6 Americas. It's a famous graph looking at how the American public view climate change, global warming. And you'll see there that there's different, groupings, 31% from alarmed, and the left to 10% thinking it's a sham, it's been dismissive. But the point is that each of those are different audiences that look at the world in a slightly different way. And if you're trying to reach them, really, they need different strategies for communication. So the first thing you have to do is think, who am I trying to reach? And then who are they? What do they like? What are their concerns? And it's only after you do that that you can actually start to think about what your communications should be. So, and that really means that you have to delve into the science of people, human science, mind science, so cognitive science, psychology, and things like that. Because the way that people make decisions is a lot more, we really understand it a lot more now. They tend to make decisions in time-poor situations, so they have to make them fast. There's huge amounts of data and information swirling around them. Much of that is uncertain, and there's a lot often of fear and emotion in some of these issues. And in that context, then the first step is that then people make decisions with their gut instinct. They make it based on their values and beliefs, not on facts. So they have what's called fast thinking. They go to something based on in their intuition, what feels right. And you often hear people talking about, this feels right, this doesn't feel right. People then realize that they've made that fast thinking judgment. And then what they then do is they then try to kind of bolster that, scaffold it by getting some information. But they're generally looking to confirm, to affirm that gut instinct that they did. So to confirm basically their values and beliefs. So they really don't want to have their fundamental values and beliefs overturned. And that means that they'll tend to reject any information that runs counter to that judgment that they made. Now, in doing that, a cognitive shortcut they often use is trust. They go to people they trust. That is people whose values kind of are very similar to their own. So it's their family, it's their friends, it's maybe people in the media that they think they share commonality with. It doesn't have to be scientists or technical experts, because what they're trying, I guess, to say is justify the fact that they were right to make that decision. And the people around them are the ones that can do it. And if they're not familiar with the scientist, then they don't necessarily kind of trust the scientist. And the fourth one really is what flows from that, is that if someone's made an opinion that's been based on values and beliefs, it's not been based on logic or facts. And so scientists, and us coming from a technical side, presenting logical, factual arguments, have a mixed reception. It's not as effective as we assume it is. So logical, factual arguments work for us, but they don't necessarily work for the multiple publics out there. And that's the fact, also bolstered by the fact that individual cognitive thinking is nested in a whole set of more community-based things about the organization you work for, the community you work for, wider society. So decision-making is complicated. So the sense and respond model really says that actually people rarely make decisions based on scientific information. And it's about goals and needs, their values and belief systems. but that there is a science to that. There's a science to communication that we can really develop. And again, going down to the skills, it's really learning that scientific understanding. What are the mental models that people have? The shortcuts, how they use emotion and motivated reasoning. It's also about how to think about your audience. How do you break it down? Advertisers, television program makers, whoever it is that sells stuff, really understand how to break down audience and frame messages. Well, there's a science to that. The importance of social networks, and fundamentally it's an interdisciplinary working environment, and you'll see from the interactions that the geoscientist is suddenly working with the creative arts and media to find new ways to connect across to people, working with the social sciences to really embed the sense in strong, robust science, empirical science. And then finally, thinking of the humanities in terms of some of the ethical and value aspects of the work we're doing. And that means really that's that model of trying to bring together these separate worlds really into a common shared area that is going to be science communication. And in that, a switch between seeing communication as conveying matters of fact, which tends to be more into the make and sell mode, to matters of concern. What are people interested in? And then how do we connect into that? So the matters of concern lead us nicely into this notion of switching to dialogues, so that communication can be seen as one way. Certainly television communication is one way. You send the stuff out, you never see the people, you really don't get very much back. But now the emphasis is about trying to develop two-way communications, genuine, authentic dialogues with people. So this is a group of us we're working on a big seismic hazard, seismic risk project, and this is Istanbul, and this is a group of seismologists, geophysicists, sitting around a table with some local community people, trying to think about what it is that they're particularly interested in. And so this is this notion of, for example, in the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, switching to a people-centered approach. So if you like, in the top left diagram, it shows you the traditional conventional approach where the scientists would advise local authorities, the local authorities would advise the public, and the scientists would have a very tangential approach to the public. But in the people-centered approach, the scientists and the local authorities have a two-way communications, and the scientists have two-way communications with the public. Now, if you imagine each of those arrows is a level of complexity, what you immediately see is that the people-centered approach is much harder to do, because it's about developing these genuine dialogues. And the image on the bottom right is me taking a bunch of geophysics PhDs and postdocs into the back streets of Istanbul to talk to local housing associations and people there about what they want the geophysicists to be looking at, because you'll maybe be surprised to know that ordinary people don't like earthquakes, whereas, as we know, geophysicists love earthquakes. So that thing is about guiding co-create. What it is, it's a marketing and communications paradigm really that talks about setting a social vision, a motivating vision that kind of creates a sense of a future, but then recognizes that it has to co-create that future with the beneficiaries. And it's referred to as kind of purpose-led. What is your purpose in communications? So if we switch again to the skills base there, interpersonal skills, empathy, authentic listening, not just listening so that you can, kind of ram down the kind of policy down someone's throat, but actually listening so you might change what you're thinking about. Participatory processes of how you negotiate, facilitate, conciliate. Thinking about the ethics and being very reflexive of what you do and actually evaluating how good the work has been. And that really determines what kind of communicator you want to be. So to my mind, one of the things is that almost at the start of science communication is why are you doing it? What do you want it to do? Are you trying to facilitate the process? Are you trying to basically broker, put information in front of people and just be neutral about it? Or do you want to be a catalyst for change? Do you think there should be a direction of change and your science has helped you say what that direction is and you want to tell people what it is? Or even probably more controversial, do you want to be the activist, the one that actually joins that community? So because you're so sure that this is the direction that we need to go, and it's so passionately important to you that you actually, as I say, become an activist in that community. That's the one I think most scientists would tend to be very nervous about. So just to draw it to a close, really, my career, I guess, has been it's very much based on that public, the beautifully named public understanding of science. It's been a long time trying to think about how to be a better community, how to frame things better, how to kind of connect it better out to people. And then really over the last few years with PhD students starting to think about working with sociologists, psychologists. The image there of Istanbul, the person with the boom pole is my PhD student, Johanna, who's a visual anthropologist. So working much more interdisciplinary way to try and get the empirical science underneath what is effective communication. I've done very little on guide and create. I think that is the new frontier for science communication, this participatory approach. But I was communications lead for the Scottish Climate Assembly, which was a citizens-led assembly, and that was kind of a guide and co-create. And I think, I suspect that most people will be starting in that bottom left and drift to some extent up to the kind of towards the kind of top right. So I think on that, I just finished with this slide. So I think that if we're looking at these issues, these big issues, so that's the salt flats of Bolivia, the Altiplano, incredible place, but also the home of 30% of the world's lithium supply. So if we want to change that petrol-driven car into an electric vehicle, we're going to need lots of lithium, and it may require us to dig that up. And so these are big moral, ethical questions. They're not just technical questions. So there's a real sense of the geoscientist trying to think, what is my role in all this? What am I communicating, and why am I communicating it? And I think that's this notion of purpose. And most of this has been taken from a paper that I published with a marketing professor recently. So just to set up Heather, then I think that, to my mind, the starting point for all of this really is thinking about communications in a much more effective way. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass over to Heather.
Thanks, Iain. I'll try and share my screen. 1 second. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. So first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the Darug people, the traditional custodians of the land where I talk from today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to thank the ASEG for the invitation to talk with Iain today, and for the support of the Earth Futures Festival that you'll hear more about shortly. So following on from Iain now, just thought I'd focus on a few more of the practical. So this is kind of the overview of, what should we be doing? And then is kind of how to do it. So in this first part, we'll look at a bit of the how and why communication is important in no matter what aspect of your work you're doing, whether it's a presentation, whether you're writing something, and how that, it could be even applying for funding, and how that is going to help you even communicate better to get those successful partnerships or funding or just feel like you've done a really good presentation. And then we'll cover a little bit more about the Earth Futures Festival after that. So the first thing really, when you're looking at what makes effective communication, is really first and foremost a consideration of who the audience is, because how you're going to communicate to different audiences is going to be very different, whether it's going to be someone from the general public, a family member, it could be a funding body, industry partner, peers, or a specialist group. So generally in their own context, I want to know, why are you telling them this? Why is it relevant to them in their own way? So obviously that's very different if it's a member of the public than if it's one of your peers. So there are some key points that you want to communicate or get across. So it's really good in advance to think about what they might be and just keep them very short. Because if you think about throwing balls, if I was to throw 5 balls at you, you might catch, 2 or 3, but you'd probably not catch more than that if I threw them all at once. And it's the same with information. So humans aren't adept at catching lots of information all at once. So it's thinking about what your key messages are going to be and making sure you kind of emphasize them and emphasize them again. And then there's also some tips towards structure and delivery of how to make it, as engaging and structure it in a way that, as Iain was suggesting, the storytelling and the narrative is very important when it comes to communication. And that's what we generally don't do enough of, really, as geoscientists in whatever we're communicating. So a modern scientist really is trained to explain their work in a particular fashion. And that starts usually with their introduction, then the methods and results, and then the discussion and the conclusions. And if you think about it, there is the discussion and the conclusion, which is is the really important thing that people are going to want to know and what's going to make a difference. And so what we see in the media is actually the opposite. So people start with the main conclusion, the big point. What is the bottom line goes up front, what is the message of this? And so we say that, you're going to explain this as the 5 W's and the 1 H. So people want to know who, what, when, where, why, and how. And then after that, after you've told them, the big takeaway message, that's when you kind of back that up with the important facts, the supporting evidence. And then you would add that kind of extra background that kind of, helps set the context and things, but is not really the critical message you're trying to get across from whatever it is that you're trying to communicate. And so you can see the difference between the kind of the traditional way that science has been built in terms of communication structure versus, say, that what we can borrow from the media and how we can then make our own science or our own work more engaging by adopting this kind of inverted pyramid approach. So if you want to think about this as homework, so I haven't got time to do it today, but some homework, and I've borrowed this one from Iain. So this is one of Iain's activities. So what you want to try to do, if you want to try to bring down this into this big picture, important message of what you do and why it's relevant to people. So you think about your work. So it could be a particular topic or project that you're working on. It could be some research that you're doing. And you want to think about, why are you doing that and why does it matter? And so you can start off with 2 minutes. So trying to explain it in 2 minutes, and then you cut it by half. So you try to do it in 1 minute, then 2.5 again. So 30 seconds and then a half again to 15 seconds. And so, I guess I could have a go at this, and I may or may not need the chemistry part in there, but I use the chemistry of volcanic rocks to better understand how volcanoes work in order to reduce the risk to humans from volcanic hazards. So that's my attempt there at that activity. So yeah, feel free to have a go at that, and you can kind of it's like an elevator pitch at the end of the day that you've got ready to go if you meet somebody or you just want to talk about what you do. So that brings us on to the audience. And also one important part of that is not to fill it with jargon and acronyms that people just don't understand what they mean. You want to bring it to keep it to real world situations, make it relevant to people. As Iain was saying, people are interested in people, people want to know what's happening to people. And so the more you can kind of make a real world situation, give an example, give a case study, then that's going to make it more relevant to people. And you can use analogies when you're talking to make it easier for everyone to kind of understand if it's science that you're trying to communicate. So we just take a look at the jargon first. So really this is for scientists or for researchers or for professionals. A jargon would be a word or a phrase that loses or changes its meaning when you use it with people who aren't in your field. And so basically things that people just don't understand. And geoscience is absolutely full of jargon. So there are different ways, you can lose people in this. So you want to keep it simple. You don't dumb it down, but you want to keep things simple so that you can keep everybody with you and get that message across. And so there'll always be a less technical way of saying something. And there are lots of tools that you can use to try and identify jargon. So when you might have jargon, might be using jargon. And so here's one. So this one's from the AGU, and they've got some examples there. So it's not expecting you to read those. So they've got some examples of what we use commonly in geoscience, and then what the public may think that they understand from those. So for example, if you took stress, you know, the geoscientists might think that that's pressure or tension exerted on a material object, but the public from that would think a mental or emotional strain. So you can think about this, there's a list there and there's many more on the website, and they give you tools of how to try to identify this. And so there's also other ways you can do it. There are a couple of tools that show you now that also, if you want to paste in some text, and if you're thinking about, you know, which are the words that might fall down and be hard for people to understand, there's one called Science and Public. So you can put in a content into that, and then it does like a little meter, and it tells you, it picks out the words that, you know, you should probably have a look at or might be difficult. You know, in that case, Niwagongo, like quite definitely on this example is going to be a tricky one for people, but as it's a name, you know, we can kind of let that one go. And then there's another tool as well, very similar, and it's a readability text, and that way you can either put in a website or you can enter text. And so it does the same thing again. It gives you a readability score, and it tells you what kind of level that your text is appropriate for. So it could be whether it's a 15-year-old or a 19-year-old, or, you know, it tells you the actual level of writing. And a good rule of thumb is that you should really be aiming for that kind of 15 to 17-year-old when you're writing for popular, for the public anyway. And then that brings us to use of analogy. So when you're comparing two different things, so for the purpose of explaining or making it clearer to people, so you're really painting this mental picture that helps people understand what you're trying to communicate to them. So the common one is like finding a needle in a haystack if something's difficult, for example. And another example, somebody said, landing on a comment is like shooting a bullet at another bullet while riding a horse blindfolded. So, you know, that gives you an impression, a really good idea of how difficult that would be. And so for me, with background in volcanoes, one of the common ones I use is a bottle of fizzy drink with the top still on. So when the top's still on, then the pressure's contained and all the gases are dissolved, you know, inside the liquid. But as soon as you release that pressure, which is the same or similar to bringing magma and molten rock from deep towards the surface where the pressure gets less, those gas bubbles will start to form and they'll take up more space. And so you can really use analogy, you know, you have to use it carefully, but you can use analogy to help you communicate some complex ideas. Now, if you just take a look at this slide and think about what the common factor is in all the things that you can see here, look for any patterns. So you may have noticed that everything there is in threes. So it comes back to that catching 5 balls. So if I throw 5 balls and you can only catch 2 or 3, why would I throw 5 at you if you can only catch them? And it's same in writing and speaking. So apparently if you present in threes, it's a more effective and memorable way and more appealing. So whether that's words or sentences, whether it's characters, it's books like a trilogy or oral traditions. And if you think about this, we've seen this a lot in stories. So the 3 little pigs, the 3 blind mice, Goldilocks and the 3 bears, the 3 musketeers, the 3 wise men, the 3 stooges. So it's used very often in storytelling and in communication is this rule of threes. And they also use it for words. So if you think about advertising, we've got Steve Jobs with that, one of the new iPads at the time was thinner, lighter and faster. And we're used to things like stop, look, listen, ready, steady, go, blood, sweat and tears. So it's a very effective way of communicating. And it comes down as well the same way if you want to do the rule of 3 in terms of telling a story, you've also got the beginning, the middle and the end. So we'll come back to that on the next slide. But just thinking about, you know, how you're going to tell a story. You also need to think about whether it's going to be a linear story. So you might start off with a big problem and then it might change and you might have a different outcome. Or you might, you know, start off in the same place with the same sort of problem and then come back to see how that research has addressed, you know, that problem that you started off in the first place. And so if you think about Cinderella, that would be a very linear story. It's a little girl, she grows up, she goes through this experience and then she ends up in a very different place at the end. Or something circular where in Lord of the Rings, they start off in their little village, they go on a big adventure, and then at the end, they end up back in their village, in their place that's familiar. So there's different, we don't have time today to go into different types of storytelling, but it's just to make you aware that you can think about as well how you're going to structure this story, this communication that you're going to tell. And so, yeah, very simple, but it's often forgotten what you're actually doing is telling a story. So it's good if you can kind of think about the beginning, the middle, and the end, how you're going to start it, what the main content's going to be. And so keep in mind that inverted triangle. So the beginning, you don't start with the introduction, you're actually starting with the most important thing that you want to communicate. So they put that bottom line really up front, what you've done and why you're doing it, and why should the audience care. So you could do this by asking a question, you could tell a story, you could give a real world example, could be a quotation, or it could be a physical object. And then in the middle of the story, that's where you give your support and your evidence to back up your main takeaway messages. And it's good to use an active, not a passive voice. We're often trained to use a passive voice in science. So, that might be saying it's generally accepted that, instead of we know that. So it's always good to use an active voice. It's a lot more engaging. And then at the end, you want to wrap it up. You want to remind everybody again about the importance of that work and how it's relevant. And then possibly, often, you might see a call to action. So what do we want you to do now that you've heard this information? What's the takeaway message, and what do we want you to do with that? And then, so that's all kind of building a story and how to, I guess, put together or structure a story. But what makes it enjoyable for the actual audience, your story? So one thing is how you actually communicate it. So the spoken words are really only one part of that picture. The other parts are body language and the voice and tone that you use. So with body language, you want to be looking for a confident position on stage, stage presence, maintain eye contact, look around the room, really show people that you're there, you're looking at them, you're talking to them. And then if this is a case of your tone and voice, then you want to try and alter that. So fast and slow, loud and soft, not to rush through what you're talking, to pause at some key points and show your enthusiasm. So enthusiasm and passion is one of the most important aspects of storytelling and communication. And then, probably practice, review. You could record yourself. You can see if you're saying ums and ahs or fidgeting, and you could practice any gestures in the mirror. And so that's kind of some practical tips and some thoughts on how to communicate effectively. And so we're going to take a look at the case study now of the Earth Futures Festival. So this is really a project in geoscience communication. And so we'll look at what it is and why it's needed, how we've designed this to try and actually, make impact and make change, and then how you can get involved as well. So there is a video to this, but I've not dared to play it on my computer because the internet's usually really slow at home. So there is a QR code there for it, or you can go to the website. It's on the homepage for the website as well. So what is the Earth Futures Festival? Well, it's an international video and film festival that's going to run in September and October 2022. We've got in-person and online events. So the whole thing, you can view all the content of the finalists, content online, but we're going to have 3 in-person events, one in New York, one in Paris at the UNESCO headquarters, and one in Sydney at the Australian Museum. And so we've got a wide range of entry categories. So this is where it comes into really trying to, go from make and sell to guide and co-create. So we've got entry categories, everything from media professionals to geoscientists, to community groups, to school students, university students, Indigenous First Nations groups, and women in geoscience. So we've got a wide range of entry categories that we're trying to really get people interested in thinking and to create their own kind of content and really learn for themselves, really. What is geoscience and how is it beneficial to our sustainable future? 3 themes for the 2022 event. One is dynamic Earth. So that one's really concerned with, how we understand geological systems, active planet processes and the rates of change, and how those changes and processes interact with the hydrosphere and atmosphere to help us to predict future rates and their impact on the biosphere. Then we've got a theme, Future Earth. So that's now where we want to really showcase where geoscience plays a critical role in building our sustainable future. So So that could be addressing challenges such as climate change, the management of our natural resources, such as water, minerals, energy and soils, carbon capture, building sustainable cities, mitigating hazards. And then human connection is the last one. And that's really about the people stories, you know, how humans are connected to the earth. So that could be, you know, about geoparks, it could be about indigenous stories, it could be women in geoscience. So they've got 3 different themes, and we have a very strong remit for education and inclusivity within the festival itself. And so we've got training workshops as well as trying to make awards and categories to expand and increase diversity and inclusion in general. And why is it needed? So I think this headline says it all. So geoscience on the chopping block, that was a recent review in Nature Reviews last year. And in Australia, I think we all know it fairly well, that there's been a lot of reduction of capacity and capability in science and geoscience recently. And I am one of those unfortunate that have experienced this firsthand. So yeah, it's a personal experience for me with the closure of my former department, which affected both myself and my husband. And so yeah, now we're having to move countries to great opportunities, but you know, it's a real a sad time for loss to Australian geoscience in general, when you know great departments and research active departments are being closed down based on student numbers mainly. And so yeah, there's a lot of work to do. And so where is the problem in this? So you know, if you think about where is the problem starting? How do we get to the root of this? And so I would suggest that it is really way back on public perceptions and understanding of geoscience. So this is where it comes into this. Geoscience communication is fundamental to all of this capability and capacity building that we need. So we all need to try to engage in this. It's also where it gets represented in the school curriculum. It's usually patches, and teachers don't necessarily have knowledge because they've got a background in something else like biology and not necessarily earth science. That's then leading to reduction of enrollments at higher education, which causes reduced offerings of units and courses, leading to closures and downsizing of geoscience tertiary institutions like we've witnessed a lot in Australia recently, reduction in domestic skilled workforce, and then loss of knowledge and skills and capability in geoscience, which ultimately then limits our ability to address the pressing global challenges that we know. So to this public perception, where is that coming from? And public trust, I think Iain was suggesting public trust is super important. So I would argue that it's actions, when large scale mining companies are doing things like destroying or removing indigenous cultural heritage, that is a perception, that is a public opinion of the mining industry, which has an impact on the perception of geoscience as well. And that contrasts with this message that was in the Nature Reviews, that without geoscientists there will be no sustainable future. And the two really don't seem to marry at the moment. We're not getting that message out there. People don't feel like that about geoscientists. And so this is where this is the type of message that I think we should be focusing more on in the media is kind of things like this. So geophysics and water security. So worldwide, and this is absolutely shocking, there's an estimated 200 million hours every day that women and girls spend collecting water. So, that's time that they're not spent in education or contributing to their workforce or earning even, economic for their country. And so geophysics actually can play an invaluable role in this, in finding water in drought-stricken areas. And so there's an example there from Somalia where it's even helping with peacekeeping missions, and one from Australia too about how geophysics is being used. So, these are the messages. This is the stories that we should be really getting out about earth science and geoscience and how it can contribute to sustainable development. So how are we doing? Yeah. And then, so just one thing about the aims of what we want to do. So really, it was a personal feeling that initiated this, and chatting to Iain and others about, the sustainability of the discipline of geoscience and how we need some rapid action, and it needs to be really large scale, and it needs to really be engaging and with the community. And so one way to do this is by combining with the arts and through other disciplines, and also through the power of storytelling. And I came across this tweet from Chris Packham, who's a naturalist and photographer and TV presenter that I actually grew up with in the UK. He was always there on the Really Wild show, and he wrote this story on Twitter about a badger, this badger that he'd one of his favorite badgers that he'd had a relationship kind of with, photographing over a number of nights. And then one night he found her, and I haven't followed the rest of the story because I think he had the whole of Twitter in tears with this story. He found her dead on the road, and he took her into his car. He patted her, and then he ended up taking her home because he was so devastated about the loss of this particular badger on a 30-mile-an-hour road, in the middle of nowhere. Shouldn't have really happened, shouldn't have been hit by a car. And so, this is a really powerful message and a way of storytelling to really tell drivers ultimately to slow down on the roads and look out for wildlife. But he did it in a way that I think made the whole of Twitter just, he was talking about the smell of the badger, the touch of the skin, really emotive stuff. And it just shows that power of storytelling. I'll never forget this story that I read on there, and it would make me think about slowing down on the roads for the badgers. So power of storytelling, you can't underestimate that. And you also can't do this on your own, and you shouldn't. And so we're very lucky that the Earth Futures Festival is building an alliance of partners, including the ASEG, in a global collaboration with shared values and goals to achieve maximum impact. And so, absolutely thrilled to be working with everybody on this project and bringing everybody together to try and work towards these same goals. So what is the impact we're hoping to achieve? Well, there's different ways. You can do it top down, policy change, or you can do it bottom up, where you're trying to build relationships between the people and the communities most affected by the issue. And so that's what we're really trying to do with the festival, is broaden that, but also a bottom up approach to this issue that we're facing in geoscience. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. And so the impact that you want to achieve, it could be changing minds, it could be changing behaviors, could be building communities or changing structures. So all of those are different impacts that you could strive towards with any communication project. And you should be really, the same way you have a strategy if you're doing anything, in your communication too, you should really be thinking about the strategy. What outcomes are you trying to achieve at the end? And then what activities can lead you towards those outcomes as you build and design the structure. So I'm just going to run through this very quickly, but it's just an example of the kind of thinking for the festival about how we've designed this around the kind of impact that we'd like to achieve by the end of it. Not necessarily in this first year, hopefully we'll be able to run it more years and build on this kind of impact. So we've identified 4 kind of stakeholders that, we feel like we can make some contributions to furthering in those areas. And so if you think about geoscientists itself, so even though we're talking about this festival as really more of a public engagement event, there's a lot we can do even within the festival for geoscientists. So one really important thing is raise awareness to the sustainable development goals to geoscientists through this, so that everybody's thinking about, how, that comes back to audience. If you want to communicate, you say how important it is what you're doing for sustainable development. And you may not really have thought about, how does your work, your daily job fit into that? But, you can start to map or think about what you do and how it contributes. There's also quite a lot, as we've seen from the, kind of the destruction of Indigenous sites, there's a lot we need to be improving in our ethical behaviour. And hopefully, with partnerships for us, such as with the International Association for the Promotion of Geoethics, which we're in discussion with at the moment, is going to help to really raise that kind of geoethical awareness of what we're doing as geoscientists. We hope that through the categories and awards, we can increase diversity and inclusion within the community, so build stronger communities in geoscience, and then improve, our general geocommunication skills, because we've got a number of workshops and we've got a geologized partnership as well for training in practical geocommunication. So I'll not go through each one of these in detail because I'd rather we have some time for questions, but you can see that we've tried to map out for each of these key stakeholders what we feel is going to be impact that we can achieve and what we want to do through all of these. So that was through media. This is for schools and education. So that's hopefully, that's in progress at the moment, trying to make some resources so that we can get more students to make content to enter into the festival. Oops, wrong way. And then general public. So yeah, it really is addressing those perceptions, raising awareness. and just, you know, hopefully getting them to also get involved and make content. So I think this is the second to last slide. So what can you do? So hopefully you can get involved, and submissions are open now. They're open until the 15th of May. So you could film something on a video camera, a phone, you know, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be edited on some free software, simple software on your computer that comes free. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. And we've got all these different categories. So there's one for if the society itself wanted to make a submission, you know, we've got a community category for that, or individuals, you could do it as geoscience professionals. And to, you know, kind of also facilitate this making content, we've got filmmaking workshops. We had one last night, the first one, and we'll put that one on the web shortly. And we've got another one next week, so next Wednesday evening our time. So that one's making, so another co-founder for the festival, Simon John Heath. So he's running these. He's a documentary director. So these are really good tips and tricks to making films. And then practical geo-communication. So we've got 300 spots through our partnership with Geologize on the new updated course. And so if you go to the website, the Earth Futures website, and tap the workshops tab, then there'll be information on the workshops and the communication course there. But we've got 300 spots available on a first come, first serve basis. So I encourage you to, you know, to jump on board if you really want to try to learn a little bit more about tips and tricks to practical geocommunication. And so that really leaves me to say thank you. Hope you'll get involved with the festival. Thanks again to ASEG for this opportunity to chat today. Looking forward to your questions. And just remember, think about the audience that you're always trying to communicate to, and what you're actually trying to get out of that and how you can make it relevant to them. So open with the most important information first, that inverted pyramid structure. And just remember, the rule of threes is always a good rule of thumb if you want to get your main points across and develop a talk structure like beginning, middle, and end. And thank you.
Clapping on behalf of everyone here. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I think everyone would have learned a lot. And yeah, those workshops as well sound great for us all to check out. We do have a couple of questions already, and I'm sure there'll be more to follow. So if everyone wants to put their questions in the Q&A box, that would be great. But I'll start with one from Janelle Simpson. Do you think we would be better served upskilling a large section of the geoscience community at more emotive communication, or do we just need to work more closely with trained communicators?
Shall I pick up that one and then throw it to Heather? The image from the workshop that I had in Istanbul with the PhD students and postdocs, that was the question we asked, actually. It was really interesting. Some of the young researchers thought, absolutely, we should do this. We should be much more, we should learn to be what's effective, and we should be using it. And emotion is a really critical part, or emotion, you know, we're not meaning kind of false one. It's just making feel as if we care about the subject rather than being very dry and technical. But some others, absolutely not. They said, you know, that's not our job. We want to be neutral and independent. And it's really important as a scientist that I don't get emotional, I don't get connected. So it strikes me it's very much a personal view. Again, going back to what kind of communicator that I want to be. I personally use it. I think it's important. I think organizations might want to look at that really carefully, because that's quite a dangerous drift, if you like, in terms of the way that they expect their technical people to communicate. So I would just say it needs to be a discussion to have, and I'd say we have to have it in the universities, and we have to have it in the industry as well. So I don't know what Heather's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think very similar, but I think, you know, we have got an opportunity there with, you know, the more social media savvy younger generations coming through that, you know, very comfortable making content, putting content out. You know, we do need to move as broad, as wide, and reach as many people as possible. So there is a benefit where, you know, everybody can kind of make their own content now, and everybody can spread the word. You know, there's somebody I follow on Twitter who talks about mud volcanoes. I never knew so much about mud volcanoes. You know, it's a really interesting way that you control the content. You can put the content out there, and we can do many different things in many different ways by everybody getting on board. But then, yeah, at the same time, I think there is advantage. We can learn a lot through, communications, marketing. So like as Iain's been doing, collaborating with different groups with different skill sets. And so, yeah, I think at structural level, then I think there should be a lot more done to support communication in general of particular areas that may need more support than others. Astronomy, for example, probably doesn't need any more support at the moment.
Yeah, great answer. A question from Liam Olden. Hi, Heather. As geoscientists, what are some of the things we can do to try and convince universities and other institutions the significance of earth sciences? When I've engaged with general public and students, I've often got great feedback from them about the significance, though it seems like we are stuck talking with a brick wall trying to convince institutions of its importance.
Yeah, I mean, so this is really a sticking point, I think, because when you talk to, say, a member of the public, I found this rock, or I've done this, or I've done, there's always some interest there. And then coming through into the higher levels of the university, that's in our case where that was falling down. So I think, there are things that you could do. Maybe it's also mapping, if you map as well to the sustainable development goals. So, if you try to do a mapping of, say, your project or your research or, the group or the institution's department's work in what you do and mapping that to sustainable development. But it's communication again. It's coming up to communication, and the higher leadership team should really have a good understanding of what the value of earth science is within the department. And so I think there's definitely a lot of work to be done there within universities themselves, that they actually understand what geoscience is, but we obviously need to help them to be able to do that as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Anthony Reid has said, guide and co-create is a fascinating endpoint. In your example of the lithium salt in the Andes and resource exploitation in general, how important is early connection with local people? And do you see this as a way to bring people along for the ride, to have a say in and some type of say over resource exploitation?
Yes. Yeah, earlier the better. And what the irony here is that, the geoscientists and sometimes the geophysicists will be the first boots on the ground in a community. So that means two things. One, you can't screw up because you mess up social license, you end up with a community against you. But the flipping that around is the opportunity with effective communications that's genuinely authentic and is a really good place to bring the community on side. And I think a lot of companies are nervous about that, but I think it's something that we really should try to embrace, a more transparent and inclusive kind of approach to that.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that one, Heather? Or?
No, I think Iain's covered that one. Thanks.
Great. Okay, another question. What would you suggest for people who are a bit socially anxious but still want to get involved in communicating geoscience to the public?
So if I answer that one. So I think, it's the same with most things. It's practice. I still get nervous every single time I do anything. It never goes away, and I think that's a good thing to have, because obviously it gives you that, that you care, you've got that energy, you've got that, I guess, adrenaline to actually, get it done. So I think, all of us still hold some anxiety about communication, even if you've done it 100 times, but with practice, it gets a lot easier. So obviously taking, not really big risks at first, maybe doing little things, and then the odd maybe interview or something. But, you can start just with a simple social media account, get used to trying to write things in Twitter's great for that. You have to try to communicate in a very small amount of space. So it really makes you think about the words that you're using and what the message is that you're trying to get across. And the other way that's kind of safe is maybe just making little videos if you wanted to do something more visual, because you can edit those, you can have control of those, it's not live, it's not, and then you can kind of build that way. Iain, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I've lost count of the number of times I've met someone who I follow on Twitter, who on Twitter is exuberant and out there, and then you meet them and they're really quite shy. And so the Twitter-scape is one place where people can kind of flourish. I think the other thing I'd say is, science communication is really broad. You can can have a fantastic science communication by being a really good writer. Or, I know a lot of people who are moving into the video games and creating video games. So this idea of the stuff that I do and maybe what Heather does is just one dimension, one facet of science communication.
Yeah. Question from Millicent Crowe. How do you think communication and public engagement with earth science will change in the next decade?
That's an interesting one for me. I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about this. My suspicion is that this more people-centered approach, where we're actually looking at sustainability and delivering well-being rather than economic, kind of advancement of making money and things like that, is something that I think will re-energize earth science. I think that the generation that's coming into our universities at the moment are different from the ones in previous ones. And I know probably every generation thinks that, but the students that I see want to make a difference. They're hyper connected into the world. They're seeing all the challenges and they want with a passion to do something. And I think earth science can open all that up, but it just needs to really look at its curriculum and step back a little bit from just saying, hey, we produce all these technical skills and we'll be the technician that helps some of this advance, to thinking about it's the way we think, it's the way we approach the problem, so that we're in the lead. We're actually vanguard of most of this aspect and making a difference. I'm excited by science, but really I think it has to grab hold of itself at all levels, but particularly in universities, and really rethink what it's all about. Heather, what about you?
Yeah, just very similar. And I think in terms of like the communication that we've seen so far, if you think about outreach in schools, it's great to have outreach in schools, but it's a very slow and very sustained process to go through. So I think that whatever we do in the future, we need to be doing a lot more within the broader public. And that's why I guess the motivation for the festival was, is trying to do something that would really reach out beyond, a single class. And, we need all of these different avenues and different types of communication to really take earth science forwards. But I also think that kind of sustainability aspect, I think is the only way communicating, the sustainability of geoscience is really going to be the only thing that keeps geoscience afloat moving forwards, because, we're getting left behind, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely agree. I had a question. So with the guide and co-create, I think it's a really interesting concept, and obviously Earth Futures Festival is a great example of that on a very big scale. But do you have any examples that have worked that sort of the individual scientist could do with their work, or even if they're not examples, just some ideas of what we could take into our work?
For me, I think it's early days for that yet. It's still, even within this straight science communication area, this is new and slightly nervous territory. I highlighted the Climate Assembly. Now these citizens' assemblies are starting to be more common, for example, bringing ordinary people in. You also call it citizen juries and things like that, whereby you kind of empower the public to then really think of the problem, and then you support them through that. So we're less of hey, we're the expert, we've got a PhD, we're standing in a box telling you what to do, and really just facilitating that. And I suspect that many of the areas where we look at social license, that is starting to move into that area, thinking of some of the work that's getting done around CCS in Australia, for example, where we're in a lot of the communities that are trying to have these much more kind of democratic, egalitarian discussions around this. But I think it's early days, and it's difficult. And you have to be in for the long term, and you have to put resources into it and all the rest of it. So I think it'll be a few more years before we really start to see some great examples of that. But Heather may know some of that, much more engaged partnerships.
Yeah. No, I think it's a challenge too. I can't think of any off the top of my head specifically for geoscience communication. For actual geoscience, there's a lot now more in the citizen science, but actually in geoscience communication, co-created, co-design projects, then I'm not familiar with any current examples. It's part of what we're trying to do with the festival, but yeah, it's still in there. It's doing a bit of the make and the sell, it's doing a bit of the guide and co-create, it's doing a bit in the middle. And so, yeah, I think there's a much more work to be done in that space.
And just to kind of follow up on that, I think part of the problem is the mindset that we've got into, and the mindset the whole academic training does, is to elevate us as experts. So you do your undergraduate, that gives you some expertise, and then you maybe do a master's or a PhD, or then you become a kind of whatever later after. And so the expectation that we've been drummed into, is kind of trained, is that that's our job, to communicate that expertise. So suddenly turning it upside down and sitting in a room listening to people who know nothing about it seems, crazy, perverse thing to do. But unless we're actually going to do that, we will really struggle to connect all the things that Heather was saying about public perceptions and changing minds out there. Unless we do that, we will remain in this rather strange alien cult wonderland that is geoscience.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity though in that area. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it develops. I can't see any more questions. There's a few comments, such as suggestions, that we can communicate our work at events like Pint of Science, or we've got Science at the Pub, where they're sort of more public attendees to those events. And a comment from Liam Olden. He mentions that it's important, even within abstracts of scientific publications, to avoid the use of jargon, which helps with the accessibility of science, and points out that people are much more likely to stay engaged if you don't lose them with jargon right at the beginning. And he also suggested the tool Grammarly for readability as well as another option. A question from Rosemary Bastian. Has anyone developed an app that enables the public to collect pictures of geological features in areas and geotag them so that they can be put into a searchable database for everyone?
So there I can't remember the name of it, but I can share it if I do. There definitely is a database where you can do it by map. And I saw somebody who was collecting, who was, basically collecting photos of just geological things that anyone could use as well, or they were even their own. And then in terms of the app, there is an app I think that is being developed. I don't know if you know more about this, Iain, than me. I don't even know how much I'm allowed to say, but there is an app being developed by a large organization, I think on the phone. So, a bit like this, you go and you find a leaf and you don't know what it is and you scan it and it tells you. Then there's gonna be an app that helps you identify rocks, and then it could give you, the background of stuff. So I can find out as well about the status of that. But yeah, no, so there are some things in the work. But I think, there is a lot of people doing a lot of things. There are kind of 3D models and databases of things and rocks. And I know Australia has a kind of a collective collection of photos and, for different sites around Australia. But I think, it's also sometimes just curating all this information. There's lots of different bits going on. We just need, and that was really what the festival is also trying to do as well. There's been content made that can already do this. We just need to bring it all together into one place so that it's kind of like a really, loud noise.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I don't know about any. What I was just smiling now because I did a search for geology once, image search, as you always do on Google Image. And all of the images had these amazing outcrops. And it suddenly dawned on me there were no people in any of them. And it suddenly then connected that actually we're very comfortable with those wilderness areas where there's no people. But actually that's a small fraction of the public that is comfortable with that. And I think this is around us really looking at ourselves in the mirror. If we're trying to connect with people, they live in cities. Most of them don't go into the countryside. Now, we might be trying to say, get out there, but actually, if we're trying to connect with their concerns, they're probably concerns about the city. And so sometimes I think we maybe need to rethink this emphasis on getting out there into these incredible places, because I think even students that we see coming in are even less interested in going into those wild places. So yeah, maybe we need to rethink our vision, our image, identity of what geology is.
Yeah, that's something I guess we've been thinking about with the ASEG as well. The typical sell, I guess, has been, you get to go to all these remote, really cool places, but that's not actually everyone's cup of tea. It's just because it's, might be the majority of current geophysicists' cup of tea that's what you end up emphasizing. But when you're trying to get new people interested in a field or, an area of study, then, you don't want to target the people who are already in it. You want to target the people who aren't in there and how you can bring them in. So yeah, that's it.
Go back to that, one of the things that we've both said about is the critical thing about who's our audience. And I think, again, when we think about recruitment, I still think we lapse back into this is what we have and this is what we should transmit out as being geoscience, rather than this business of thinking, who are the people that are 16 and 17-year-olds now? What are they interested in? What do they want? And thinking, if we really are genuinely saying that the audience matters, the end user matters, the customer matters, then if we understand them better, we can adapt our curriculum to suit this new type of people. And that might be heresy to people out there. Say, no, there's such a thing as a geologist. They need this, they need their English petrology, they need the serology, they need this and that. But actually what we're seeing is that I think addressing, that the essence of communication says you cannot communicate unless you know who you're trying to communicate with. And so I guess more intelligence from us about who those people are is going to be essential, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't read these, so I'm not sure if they're comments or questions, but I'll read them aloud. From Luke Nothdurft. I totally agree with the bottom-up approach. Generational change requires a school curriculum that is modern and future-focused, but also teachers that are willing and confident to deliver it to a range of ages. How do we influence the curriculum change and the teacher's vacuum in earth science?
Oh, it's a tough one. There's opportunities obviously to give feedback on curriculum changes, which, people like the GSA were giving feedback. There was a recent review recently of changes to curriculum, and you can give feedback, but it's not, it's not sufficient enough because they've already made the change and you're just commenting on that change. And of course, there's geoscience is not featured in the way that we would like to see it. But I think there is more of this kind of problem-based approach to, teaching now, teaching, you don't kind of just do individual topics anymore in curriculums, and they do this kind of problem-based approach. So I think there's a really good opportunity there, because everything that you would do in those kind of big problems, involves geoscience. And so, yeah, maybe it's just more interaction with, the people that are writing the curriculums, the teachers' associations. We've been doing outreach and keynotes for them and things, but maybe it's having a bit more of a sit at the table and when those things are being designed and trying to that's the way, it's got to be in early in those discussions to be able to make that change. And then the teacher vacuum, it's I think it's always been, I know it was a challenge when I was in the UK, doing my PhD. I know it's a challenge in Australia. It's a challenge that teacher confidence in earth science and teacher knowledge of earth science. So there are, obviously, there's Geoscience Australia for Australia out there, education programs. There's professional development from TSEP. There's the Australian Earth Science Education as well. So we do have support for those, but yeah, maybe it's just trying to get them, accelerate and make it larger scale to be able to make more impact in that way.
Yeah, and I noticed that comment from Joe there, and I think it is interesting. I remember being very struck by the situation in Western Australia, where when geology sort of went out the curriculum and it was blended into environmental science, but the course that was created, because both sides worked together, created earth and environmental sciences at school. And that ended up being really opening up geoscience to a much wider audience, because it was badged very clearly. People realized that the bits of the curriculum they liked, that there were the earth bits, meant that they could go to geology. And I think, as I remember, there was a big uptake in geology courses. So sometimes I think we need to, is that slightly bigger picture. It's maybe not hanging on to geology. It's this business about what is the purpose of geology, where should it sit, and what should it, why are we wanting them to know about geology? And I think, again, that's something we've not really unpicked a lot about.
I think we've got one more question and then we might wrap it up, I think. So from Eric Bayari, sorry, my dogs have just started barking. They did well till now. How do African universities get engagements with other universities outside Africa for collaborations?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think there'll be lots of different mechanisms. Heather and I are very closely involved with UNESCO, and in the UNESCO IGCP, the International geoscience programs, we have lots of connections with African universities. I think African universities are really, there's a different set of requirements. A lot of it still is around the resource development, supporting statehood, supporting economic development. And that sustainability in some places is a bit of a luxury, but of course, in many African countries, the issues around climate change and the ecological crisis are crippling. So we need to, it would be great to try to get better connections with African universities to try and, take them through that transition to where we are now, so that they don't have to maybe go through and make the same mistakes we did.
That's great, thank you. All right, I think that, that wraps up all the questions. So thank you very much, both of you, for your presentation. And I think, there's lots of takeaway lessons to learn there. And I wish you all the best with the Earth Futures Festival. And I hope that everyone who's been listening today gets engaged with the festival, whether they use their artistic streak to enter into the festival or just to help promote the festival. And of course, join in and watch the finalists videos when they come out. And if anyone here as an ASEG member wants help getting a group together to put in a entry, then feel free to send an email, contact us through the ASEG website, and we can help to facilitate that. So thank you very much, Iain and Heather, and very much appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Kate. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining.